Okay, so Black Myth Wukong continues to make a lot of noise on the Xbox side to bring in 2025. This is a big controversy. It started off this year by the developer from Game Science coming out and saying, hey, look, the Series S is the bottleneck that is preventing us, in so many words they said this, preventing us from releasing the game on the Xbox console. And then that in turn led to a lot of us in the gaming community going back to reporters that's doubled down on what Xbox was saying in 2024, that what was holding it back was an exclusive deal, a secret one with PlayStation, right? We went back to those reporters, said, hey, now the developer is contradicting you even further. Like, what say ye? For only the said publishers to then do a 180 and say, okay, uncle, we're not sure what's happening now, right? You know what I'm saying? One journalist saying, this is frustrating. I don't understand what's going on. We're not getting a response from Xbox. Okay. So instead of this being the end of the story and this thing starting to wind down, it's now getting additional life from the Xbox gamer, where the Xbox gamer now is conceding along with the journalists that there was a secret deal, but they're saying that no, the Series S isn't a challenge. It's, you need to get good, developer. You're bad. You're a bad developer. That's why this game isn't here. Stop talking stuff on our beloved Series S, right? And when we dissect this conversation where it's going now, I'm like, palm and face. I don't think that the examples that people on the Pro Series S side are putting out there is the flex they want to put out publicly. I'm going to try my best to explain, because I honestly am a novice when it comes to some of the technical stuff here. But with no further ado, let's do it. It's your boy MM2K of Hard Knock Digital Culture, Cloud Dosage, and here MM2K Gaming News, back again with another episode of the Quick Dose. This is where we talk about the latest and greatest in the video gaming sphere, and off the cuff, no script, I give you guys my analysis on it. With that said, before we go any further, do us a huge favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and rock those bells for notifications. And if you've already rocked the bell or not, make sure you select all. YouTube is doing this new thing, I guess, for 2025. They're trying to retrain their algorithm. And look, I'm going to be transparent with you, and no offense to you, Google, YouTube, your algorithm when it comes to this regard is trash. You're not showing people the content that they want to see. Don't rely on their algorithm again this year. I would change it to all. They've done the same thing to me, and there's a lot of content that I want to see from the people that I follow that YouTube is not putting in my feed. So if you don't want to run into that same thing here, make sure that with this channel, and I recommend with any channel that you're following, you make sure that you change that bell to all right? With no further ado, let's get into this one. Here's what I want to do when I get into this one, and I'm sighing because as an example, I'm using someone I'm definitely cool with, right? It's a homie, the big homie or little homie, if you're going by age. It's the homie Doc Dark, all right? It's my homie. For those of you that are unaware, Doc Dark, I was introduced to Doc Dark through Stadia of all places. I heard him saying some things about Stadia, him being interested in cloud gaming. I'm being a big cloud gaming advocate. I sent him a Stadia unit, you know what I mean, on the house. He tried it, he liked it. He simply added it to the portfolio, which is what we were looking to do. You know, just get people exposed to it. And if they liked it, great. If they didn't like it, that was even greater, because then they could let Google know what was wrong with it, so it could be a better product for the masses. He ended up enjoying it. It didn't become his main way to game, but it became part of his gaming portfolio, which I think reasonably anybody that is an enthusiast of tech, that's all they want, is people to try it and give it a shot and not listen to noise on the periphery, right? So that was the beginning of our relationship, and we've been cool since then. We've done podcasts together. He graced us on a podcast that we have on the channel, and the episodes are still here. The podcast is called The Commission. It was me, him. Shout out to Proper's Place and other people, we had a lot of fun doing that podcast. Also, who else we had Project Storm on there, Bunny. We had a bunch of people coming through. You know what I mean? It was a great podcast. We had fun while we were doing it. And then Doc has been on this channel. You know what I'm saying? So even though we dispute things, it's all in jest, it's all jolly or whatever. And I really was trying to figure out, did I want to use Doc as an example? Not because he would mind or I'm attacking him. It's just the message that I think Doc is giving. I think he inadvertently doesn't realize the echo chamber that might be fed here. What am I talking about? We're blaming the devs again. And we're blaming the devs in behoost to what we want as gamers. We're cutting off our nose to spite our face. We've already been here. We've done this before. And I'm talking particularly to Xbox gamers, and I'm talking to Doc too, Xbox gamers like Doc, who at the beginning of the Xbox Series generation, when the devs came out and told them, hey, look, we don't like this Series S thing. We were successful in getting Xbox to not do it at first. Then in their ambitions to try to have a cheaper alternative to the Series X, when they realized that xCloud wasn't going to be sufficient, they brought back Lockhart / the Series S. And now it's throwing a monkey wrench in our plans. When the devs were trying to explain this to gamers and said there would be long-term ramifications, you guys shot them down. And as an end result, not only were you missing games from these third-party devs, but to over-extenuate the point, Xbox developers themselves did not bring games to quality. Games like Halo were missing core features like co-op, and games are launching at 30 frames per second. And I know Doc is an advocate for developers getting better, but I think there might be a gap in foresight here to how this works. Do you really think that Xbox is wants to launch games incomplete? Or did they put themselves in a precarious situation with the Series S to where they can't sit there and wait forever to optimize a game? Maybe what the Black Myth Wukong developer said, that, hey, when you're trying to use these general engines and stuff like that, like UE5, it takes years of optimization, for a third-party developer, and even first-party developers are going to have problems. So you got to launch the game anyway. And as they launch the game and they get vital feedback from people that are playing it, that helps them do the optimization. And that's why you see 6 months later that the game, you know what I'm saying, then has a 60 frames per second mode. Trust me, as much as I kick Xbox in the ribs, they do not want to launch games at 30 frames per second. They put themselves in a precarious situation, and this is why this happens. Larian Studios, one of the most accomplished developers out there, they had problems. It's the Series S, it's not just get good. But even though there's a mounting hill of evidence, people still rely on this, gotta get good. And we've heard this before in another generation. I'll get to that in a second. But here's what I'm responding to in regards to what Doc said. And it's not just Doc. I don't want to make it seem like I'm zeroing on Doc, and I'm not attacking him as a person. Doc is the homie. I'm just, and again, unlike other people who I think will just want to die on the hill of Xbox, I don't know if people in Doc's realm understand what they're doing here with this message. So here's what I'm responding to, and let's try to get to a bigger screen so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. There we go. All right, that's better. So Doc says, here's messed up my last post. Here's a clear one. Indiana Jones requirements and Black Myth Wukong requirements. Hint, Indiana Jones has a higher requirements, but it can run on the Series S. Clearly the developer's fault. Argue with your mama. We got ammo. All right. So here goes the requirements for Indiana Jones right here. As you can see, there's a requirement, and these are PC requirements, which again, there's differences between PC and console, but still. The PC requirements, 16 gigabyte of RAM. And then it has a higher requirement for the graphics card. I'll get into that because I talked to people about this and why this is. And again, I think there's a gap in foresight in regards to this and why this is even being used as an example, right? So, and then you go to Black Myth Wukong, which also has minimum requirements on PC for 16 gigabytes of RAM. And it actually has a lower graphics card requirement at 1060, at a 1060, right? And so that's the evidence that Doc is putting forth to say it's just a get good thing because these people were able to do it, and they require more on PC, and these people weren't able to do it. So I go into a lengthy rant on Twitter. I say, admittedly, I'm no tech expert, so I need you all's help here. Is it the system memory that's the issue here? You know, and it is the 16 gigabytes of RAM, and I've consulted people that have better knowledge on this than I am. It is the 16 gigabytes of RAM. But here's the difference, right? We have games built on entirely different engines, right? Where Black Myth Wukong was developed on UE5. We know UE5 is extremely taxing when you start using the technologies and stuff like that on UE5. Digital Foundry talks about this all the time, about how taxing those elements are. This was developed on ET 7, which is Microsoft proprietary hardware. So when they bought Bethesda, this was their hardware, and the latest iteration of it, ET 7, of course, would have been updated and catered to work with Xbox consoles, more so than UE5, right? Right, okay, all right. So let's continue on. I say, then I imagine there's a variety of other things going on, which makes this not so black and white. Black Myth Wukong started development in 2018. And if you look, it's just simply looking it up. You can see that Black Myth Wukong started in 2018. And why I knew this as well is because when I covered Stadia and they were talking about cloud platforms that they would potentially go to, I remember a lot of us was like, yeah, I mean, what they're saying, Stadia's got to be included. So a lot of us on the cloud side, we've been following everything they've been saying. They've talked about how they wanted to primarily be on the most, there's a lot of things that they're trying to do technologically, and they want to be on the systems that run their platform the best. So they had a very high threshold of performance that they were going to settle for when they talked about that early. Right? And a lot of you would have missed it. Us on the cloud side, because we were just like looking to ensure that this thing came to Stadia, we were watching every single word. So that started in 2018. Indiana Jones, from my research, started development in early 2021. Right? As of mid-2021, the game was in very early state of development. It was developed using the custom motor game engine ID Tech 7, again, which is proprietary Microsoft hardware. Machine Games, again, they've built multiple games with Xbox. They have other games on there. They're now a first-party studio, and now they got a first-party proprietary engine that, you know, again, would be catered towards, you know, running more efficiently on Series S than likely other third-party attempts, right? Or third-party applications. So I continue on and I say, Game Science probably began building the game around the X capabilities in Lockhart, where Series S was reinstated. They decided not to cut back their ambitions, but try to optimize later. What am I talking about here? What do I mean Series S was reinstated? Well, if you follow our content, you would recognize this video that I have up on the screen right now, where I talked about several years ago. And again, people like Doc who are newer to this maybe weren't around when this happened, but that's why I say it's always important to do your research before we start doubling down and cascading things that we don't have full insight on. The Series S was not supposed to release. I repeat, the Series S wasn't supposed to release. And if you don't want to believe me, fine, don't believe me. Take it from Brad Sams from the Paul Thurrott think tank, one of the premier think tanks regarding all things Microsoft. Brad Sams handles things Xbox. Several years ago, Brad Sams enlightened us and let us know that, hey, the Series S was already proposed at first to developers. Developers rejected it and was like, no, we don't want to do this because of the RAM and the things. It's going to complicate development. If you do this, we're going to build games to the capabilities of the Series S and only scale it up the best way we can to the Series X, meaning the Series X is not going to be utilized to its capabilities. Hence why, even though the Series X is stronger on paper, you're seeing a split between current gen games, how they perform on PlayStation 5 and Series X. I don't have a complete tally, but some may argue, without having that complete tally in front of them, that more current gen games, ninth generation games, may be actually slightly in the favor of PlayStation 5, right? It shouldn't be that way because of the power of the X. Well, guess what is the problem? People are developing for the least common denominator and then just scaling up. They're not using all the capabilities of the X. That was what Brad Sams tried to warn us about several years ago. What happened was, when Brad Sams first put that video out, he was viciously attacked. The same way that, honestly, people like my good friend Doc are viciously attacking those that are trying to say, hey, look, here is the problem. This is the issue. Brad Sams was viciously attacked after just trying to warn his contemporaries about what could possibly happen if Xbox goes down this road. And he unlisted the video. Lucky for us, we downloaded it before it was unlisted. And we discovered it a year later, and I did a video on it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this excerpt from my video, which is called, Did Brad Sams Already Expose the Xbox Series S Bottleneck Last Year? This video is 4 years old, but Brad Sams revealed this 5 years ago. If you get a chance after you watch this video, check that out. Here it goes. Here goes the excerpt in question. I'm going to shut up now and let you listen. What I'm going to do now, with no further ado, is play for you the clip from Brad Sams that details all this. So let's do this right now, and we'll talk about it on the back end.
That being said, here is what I have heard, and some other people have actually heard very similar things. First off, when you tell a developer to build a game for a next generation console, and there are two options, let's just say Lockhart and Anaconda, what you do is you build to make sure that it's going to run well on Lockhart and then scale it up to work well on Anaconda, because it's easier to scale up than it is to scale down. And so Microsoft was getting a lot of feedback from developers who have access to this information in the dev kits saying, hey, we're going to build for Lockhart and then we'll just scale it up and hopefully it looks good and hopefully it runs well and all that good stuff at 4K. And that is not what Microsoft wanted to hear. They wanted to hear, right, that you're going to have these great 1080p experiences and the great 4K. And developers like, look, we have limited resources. We're going to build for the low end and then scale it up because we know it will work on the high end. That is not what Microsoft wants to hear going into the next generation console wars.
So there you have it. They said they were going to scale up and not utilize the tools or whatever. You know what I mean? So Xbox, for those of you that remember, Xbox, when they went into, I think, XO19 or something, or XO18 it was, and people were asking about Scarlet, which was the code name for Series X. Lockhart was Series S, Scarlet was Series X. Remember, Phil Spencer said we're only talking about one console, because they kind of were on the path of, we're only going to release the Series X as a physical console. And for people that want a cheaper option into the generation, we're going to launch xCloud. That was their original plan. Then they saw Stadia, and they saw how better Stadia was, better performant that Stadia was over xCloud. And then they realized there's no way they can offer and sell xCloud when Stadia, it performs so much better. Jazz Gordon tried to put out a video trying to make comparisons of Destiny on xCloud versus Stadia. And no, he made an article. We actually put out a video debunking what he said to show you how more performant Stadia was to xCloud. And many would argue, even to today, even though Stadia's been dead a couple of years, Stadia still performs better than what xCloud does right now. Okay. So once Phil realized that, and he admitted that in the Fortune magazine video, when the Fortune magazine people said, interview said, why don't you just release this out of beta? Phil Spencer himself said, would you release that? In other words, saying this ain't good enough yet. So he knew that. So after they realized they couldn't use this as the alternative for people that wanted to get into 9th gen gaming, they then all of a sudden through Lockhart, which is the Series S, back on developers. So if you look at that timeline, and I think developers discovered that they needed to update they were bringing back Lockhart to Series S, and I don't think they realized that until 2019. Anyway, the message is that by this time, the developers of Black Myth Wukong, Game Science, they had already started development on their game. They have already filled out their scope, and they already started development on the game. And when the Series S was brought back into the picture, reasonably, they must have just said, okay, well, we'll just optimize for it later. I don't think they had any idea how much of a crap fest it would be. So they're building this game using Unreal Engine 5, right? Which is very taxing. And they're doing all this ambitious stuff. And again, very taxing, very ambitious. Hell, it's not like Black Myth Wukong runs like butter on the PlayStation 5. It ran like butter on the PlayStation 5 at launch. No, it didn't. So can you imagine, if the lowest common denominator that you're building for is the PlayStation 5 and it had launch problems, what the hell you think it's going to do on the S? And again, before any of this became an issue, Game Science had made it known that there was a standard of performance they were looking for before they released the game anywhere. And I think at the time, they just didn't realize that how underperformant the Series S would be. And why would they? If they likely started producing the game and started creating the game without the Series S even in mind. If we look back at the timeline in chronological order, okay? So with that said, let's go back to my tweet with in response to what Doc put out there. I said, so I imagine dev start time played a key role. Probably more so is the use of proprietary engine. With that said, it would be like telling third-party devs during the PlayStation 3 era, look at Naughty Dog. They're making great performing games for the PlayStation 3. Devs get better. That would never fly. That would never fly. And for those of you that don't understand, again, like my homie Doc, he may not, be aware of the circumstances back then. Remember, and I'm not saying he didn't game back then, but he probably did. He wasn't aware of or others in his camp who I think are not trying to be nefarious here. They're just not looking at this from 5,000 feet. I think they are not aware of the development challenges with the PlayStation 3. Remember, the PlayStation 3 had that the core processor or the core technology, whatever it was. And third-party developers was like, this is trash. They couldn't get games to run in a stable fashion. Multi-plat games were running horrible at first. It wasn't until the last 2 years. Again, the last 2 years, that PlayStation 3, let's take a look. The PlayStation 3 generation, when did the PS3 launch? PS3 launched in 2016. 2006. It wasn't until 2011 did third-party devs finally, get their groove with the PlayStation 3. And the PlayStation 3, it wasn't like it was leagues behind the Xbox. So they had incentive. Listen to this. Listen to this, my friends. Listen to this, Doc. And all my friends who I think are inadvertently arguing something that you don't realize what you're arguing. The PlayStation 3, there was heavy incentive for developers to still put their games on there, because it wasn't like the 360 had destroyed the PlayStation 3 in the US. They weren't destroying them globally. They had a slight lead globally only because of what they were doing in the US. So developers still had heavy incentive to develop for the PlayStation 3, and they still couldn't optimize until 2011, 5 years into the generation. It took them until 5 years into the generation for a system that they had heavy incentive to develop for them to finally get it. We're talking about 4 years into a generation where there's a lot more bells and whistles happening in games than there was back then. A lot more complicated intricacies. You got over 2,000 developers at times. They're offshoring development to China and all these other places to help with these games and stuff like that. You have a lot more intricate things happening now than you did back then. And it took them 5 years to learn how to develop for the PlayStation 3. And it's just a matter of getting good. You know what I'm saying? Like if people just took the time to look at the history of things, I think they would get a broader scope of what they would argue or what they're arguing for before they hit the button send. The PlayStation 3 wasn't just a get good thing. And trust all the Naughty Dog games and the Insomniac games, those were of the best looking games of the generation, because the engines and everything that they were doing were catered around the PlayStation 3. Unreal Engine isn't catered around the Xbox Series S. All these other third-party engines are not so. Hell, even the tools that Xbox is using themselves aren't that proficient. Now, Id 7 engine and I've heard people argue this, like Maddie Plays, and check out Maddie Plays, Doc, and others if you haven't. There's a bigger conversation going around the gaming community, the gaming dev community, where they're asking, Xbox, why aren't you using this engine that you use for Indiana Jones? Why aren't you using this engine to develop your games? So I don't think it's a get good thing. This is an Xbox get smart thing. Number one, you have an engine that is like killing it on your more complicated hardware, your underperforming hardware. Number one, you need to use that internally, and maybe what you should start doing is just start licensing it out. Because when Indiana Jones, when it drops on PlayStation 5, if that thing looks great on PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro enhancement is excellent, then man, oh man, you got a competitor to Unreal Engine, and Microsoft, you can make more money off of that. But here's the bigger thing. Let's go back to the tweet. I don't think it's an issue of just getting good. Because if that was the case, then why couldn't just the devs get good with less things to deal with during the PlayStation 3 era, right? I finished my tweet off with this. I felt like chiming in because even though I love my bro's work, and again, like I said, Doc, me and Doc are cool. I just think Doc may be arguing or pivoting from a side. I don't think he realizes what he's saying in full context. I'm not trying to virtual signal here, but blaming devs when Xbox's own dev team fell short 30 frames per second, only launches and worse, to me is not the way to go. But again, I could be wrong in my analysis. Help me out if so. That's it from your boy. Let me know what you think about this, because we're going to be talking about this in the podcast. If you're watching the podcast, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about this in the podcast. If you're not watching the podcast, stay tuned for the cards to take you there. It's a hell of a discussion. And shout out to the homie Doc. I don't think he realizes, he's using that get good dev argument again, and it's the same thing that hamstrung the Xbox consoles at the beginning of the generation. Look no further than the Xbox developers themselves that are having issues, and they might have a diamond in the rough with the Edge 7 engine. But if the Edge 7 engine is the only thing that can produce beautiful, gorgeous, lush, you know what I mean, things for the Series S, or if it's only one of the few things, that's not a development problem. That's a hardware problem, and Microsoft has to figure it out. End of story. Let me know what you think about this. With that said, if you're watching the podcast, stay tuned for a great live session. Until next time, have a wonderful gaming day. Peace.